just to get this out of the way, I mean, there's been a lot of focus on this, and who knows, I guess pretty soon we might just get the verdict on this one, because the Federal High Court sitting in Abuja has now fixed June the 30th for judgment in the suit filed by the former senator representing, well, that's supposed to be actually the infectious diseases bill. Yes, he did challenge that. But then, you know, at that resumed hearing, the lawyer to Senator Malaye, did inform the court that some sections of the proposed infectious diseases bill were not, they're actually injurious and capable of affecting the fundamental rights of, that's his client, Malaye, not just him now, because he's not the only one that, if that bill comes into force, will be affected. But the lawyers to the House of Reps, that's Attorney General and Federation, and the IG have challenged the competency of that suit and the jurisdiction of the court to entertain that one. So there's been a lot of focus on that, but so that you know, mark your calendar for that day and see what happens. But speaking about which, well, it appears as though sometimes you ask yourself, is it not business as usual? That's not what the PTF likes everyone to believe concerning how we're conducting ourselves with respect to COVID. And so you can see the figures now. 573 new cases, and they are rising. Well, yes, Lagos goes back to that top spot, but Rivers recording 103 cases now. So, wow. But your states, and Edo State having 40 cases. Remember, there's going to be elections pretty soon in Edo State. So if they keep getting these kind of cases, how are they going to manage things? But it's something that's going to be quite challenging while we focus on that. But not to forget as well, guys, yesterday we did highlight at some point the scenario going on in Abuja about the shutting of the Jabi Mall and how did they move from one place to the other. As we speak, they've not lifted that interstate lockdown. They're still not allowed to move, but it turns out that people have actually been moving. I mean, yesterday we did speak, we got Mr. Shehu, Gaba Shehu, and he did say, well, some persons have been traveling, and then the report making the rounds about the villa after that shooting incident, well, did say that, well, some officials there have been traveling. And so you didn't ask yourselves, when the Minister of Aviation did sanction ExecuJet, is that scapegoatism, given the fact that lots of movement has been happening? Then if they've been moving non-essential flights, if they have been moving, so that then raises questions as to how we are approaching all of these things. And besides, there was a question yesterday as well. Did they move to sanction them because there was an outcry on Twitter or on social media? And then the question too is, so what about the FCT? Did they know about all of this? When all those were landing, how come they didn't get the information and pass it to the relevant authorities to know this is what's actually going on? So it does appear as though there are certainly more questions than we have heard them answer at the moment.
Especially when you imagine the logistics involved in landing a flight. It's not as though you just drive a car from one place to another and that's it. I mean, it's a full-blown,
operation.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's not something that you can do in isolation. By the way, if you fly drones randomly around, you get some warning, talk more of a plane. So definitely, it leaves a lot of questions to be answered. And I mean, when you mention scapegoatism, that's what a lot of people are wondering about, because definitely there was some form of authority from the government angle that was given to the flight. I mean, I could go on and on, but what is also shocking is the fact that we see our cases rising every day. By the way, this is not where we are as at March, as at April. And at that time, a lot of people were concerned. A lot of people were washing their hands using, sanitizers, wearing their face masks, keeping physical distancing.
Yeah, I still use this morning.
Yeah, at that point, we're recording 50, 100 daily. But look at us now, we're recording over 500. And it seems as though people think this is over. I mean, about that, I could go on and on, like I said, about that event in the FCT. But, if you look around, people have been traveling. We need to really tell ourselves the truth. On paper, yes, there's an interstate, lockdown and all that. But people travel. I mean, I've gone to black market parks, I've gone to some other parks, and I see that people move. If you go on the roads, I mean, the highways during day and night, you see people moving. So let's be honest with ourselves. On paper, there is an interstate, lockdown, but in reality, there isn't, and that talks about the air also. So let's be honest with ourselves. If we want to just remove the whole lockdown and go back to life as normal, let's tell ourselves that's what we want to do. But telling ourselves that we're in a certain phase of a lockdown and what is really happening does not look like that, I don't think it makes sense, honestly.
The only thing that I think will make sense at the end of it is for us to get some sort of lead on this pandemic. Just some sort of control, some sort of treatment, some sort of way to manage.
If we could, we would have. The world would have a long time ago.
All these issues that we're talking about, these things, there are pockets of issues all over the place. Yeah. We talk about the issue at the villa. Somebody traveled from Abuja to Lagos and back. We talked about interstate travel that is pervasive. How about the people in the different states of Nigeria who don't even give any reckoning to whether or not there is COVID-19. There is a report that one of our correspondents in Nasarawa State, took, and she went to town, and in fact, one of the people in the environment was telling her, there is no COVID here. Point blank.
The people in the background, when she was saying they're not wearing masks, you expect people to cover their faces, but they were staring at her like, yes, I'm not wearing my mask.
So it goes back to the communication of this whole thing. Chamberlain is flustered. But, it goes back to the how do we even, communicate these things, to people. The learned, the semi-learned, the unlearned, we all just seem to be, going on as if life is normal. Yes, life is normal, but life is precious. I don't know how else we can stress this, because it's gotten to that point now. I'm also pretty sure that PTF COVID-19 is aware of some of the issues that we are raising. Have that also been factored? Have those things, these pockets of issues, been factored into the global strategy, interfacing from the federal state with
global strategy?
The global strategy,
the national strategy,
the global strategy of the PTF COVID-19. They
have a global strategy?
Chamberlain, please.
So
maybe the national strategy, but you know what I mean. The entire strategy that the COVID-19 PTF is looking at, I want to believe that they have also factored in these issues, the non-compliance of people into this thing. There has been that scare of a second wave, and when that question was posted to the national coordinator, they said, we're not even done with the first phase. We're not even done with the first wave. Why talk about the second wave? So if the first wave is still this pervasive, we are recording in hundreds. The highest we've gone is 687 at one given time. And now it seems that we are costing around 400, 500 every day. I don't know. But we just need to find a way to get a lead on this thing. Otherwise, I don't see how we're going to convince people to observe these protocols that we've been recommending. Okay.
I don't think that we're the only ones with that problem. Only yesterday I was watching the news and I heard that the president of Ghana, Nana Akufo-Addo, has said it's going to be compulsory for Ghanaians to wear the mask in public. And it's going to be something that the police will have to enforce. The law enforcement authorities in Ghana are going to be enforcing. So if we have tried a soft appeal and it's not working, and I think that we have to find systems within our country that can effectively police people to wear their mask. Because as you rightly pointed out, gentlemen, the figures are not going down. We don't want Corona to be here forever and ever. We want it to go away. I mean, the NCDC by now, it looks like a joke to some people, but this test that we're recording every day is not just people's health, it's also a lot of people's work. I mean, it increases the workload that they have to do on a daily basis. Their workload is not reducing. The health workers who have to look after the patients that have been brought to the hospital stand an increased risk of being exposed and losing their lives, and still have to keep looking after these people, especially with the numbers increasing. They are going to be fatigued anytime soon. So is it possible for us to ensure that we do something beyond talking? If we have communicated, people are aware, because in the villages that we have mentioned, covered by our correspondent Hajara, people were not ignorant of the fact that there was something in town that could take their lives. They were very, very fully aware. They just felt that, well, we're not saying it. It's not amongst us here. We're not afraid of it. And that was that. They kept on, with their lives. That aside, I mean, that aside, in terms of enforcing simple things like wear your mask when you have to go out, or if you're living in your community, wear your mask, don't be lax, wash your hands, and things of the sort. That is there. But when you now have big regulations like we have in the Nigerian airspace, you have within aviation, for instance. I know one of the things that the minister was saying yesterday was that it is one aviation. You guys have raised very germane questions. If the aviation authorities say that they were deceived, that the flight that they approved was supposed to be for a judge who had urgent business to conduct in Abuja, and the flight was now diverted and used for something else, will the authorities in Abuja also claim that they too were deceived and they knew nothing of the concept that was happening? And of course, the story, the issues we have raised, even within aviation, is it all the time that you are deceived? Is it all the time that you were not aware that flights have been going up and down, or that commercial private jet companies have been advertising openly that indeed you can obtain a flight from Lagos to Abuja for as little as $1,000? Well, maybe $1,000 is not little right now. It's certainly not little. It's not for ordinary people. It is for those who can afford it, but it's still little. I mean, for those people who can afford it, or even travel to London or wherever it is for as much as $7,000. What are we talking about here? So I think that, they should take off the veil. There is a lot of hypocrisy going around. There's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of did I say feigned ignorance? And I think that they should take the Nigerian people a little more seriously. Where it is we can regulate and, hold firm our ground, we should do that. Where it is that it is appeal that we'll continue to appeal, let us appeal. But where it is that we can enforce, by all means, let us look for another method if talking is not working. Gentlemen.
Well, yes, indeed. We'll see how we can expand that as we progress in the course of the program. So you just have to hang on with us. But in the meantime, let's take you through what some of the dailies are talking about this morning. All right, let's take a look at Nigerian Tribune first. PTF warns against schools reopening as Oyo reopens schools for primary 6, JSS 3, SS3 on June 29. Wow, so there you go. But in the meantime, Lagos warns private schools proprietors on opening of schools. And then you have that one, which we did talk about in the opening sequence. Naira Marley, Aviation Minister, suspends executive jet services. So all of that packed here. So if PTF is warning against schools reopening, I thought at that time they had said, okay, well, we've taken some of these decisions, but it's up to the states to now begin to, internalize and then take it off from there. Now, maybe they're saying, whoa, well, much as we did say so, but you cannot do. Well, what can the PTF do then?
It's just a warning anyway.
So the states will say, well, we also have the interest of our people at heart. Here's what we're going to do anyway. So this is what you have. Where do they go from there? They might ask. And then, yeah, we still have politics on the bottom here. Obaseki not guaranteed victory as incumbent for Shomole. I know those days people normally thumb their chest, but we're incumbent, so we'll have home advantage if you bring that football parlance to politics. Don't know if it still works. But look at some of the riders now. As APC governors, NWC meets with Chief of Staff at Villa. Governors Forum, now Toothless Bulldog, Beggars Forum. Okay. Obaseki's disqualification, impunity, unimaginable, he says. APC's treatment of Ambode Obaseki, horrendous, as ascribed to Clark. And he keeps going back and forth. And then this one here, Wadume Falana writes, AGF demands immediate arrest of soldiers who killed policemen. I mean, the impression people get is they think, look, are some people above the law, or more animals equal than the other? And, several other questions. Impressions matter, though. So that's Tribune this morning.
Well, let's take a look at the Daily Trust. The big story. Name traditional rulers aiding bandits. Katsina residents tell federal government. Of course, security has been a major issue, and you see the riders. We're deliberating on the matter. That's coming from the Katsina Emirate. Stop the blame game. Who said that? Well, more details on page 5 of the Daily Trust. But look at that story right on top of the big one. IGP lists causes of rape, says 717 cases recorded in 5 months. That's an average of 140 per month. But then, you know, when you see the one, the story, IGP lists causes of rape, for a lot of people, what they say causes rape is rapists. I mean, they don't have a long list of causes of rape. They just say, I mean, it's only rapists that cause rape. But it will be interesting to find out, you know, how the IGP lists this
I think
one.
I should have asked them, what is the police doing about it? Have they, the reporting mechanisms, what have they done? Can anybody walk in there and report? Do they have all of those facilities? Is it conducive? Why are they not reporting those cases? And those are the ones that are reported anyway.
So you imagine the ones that are not reported?
And add to that list, what's the police doing to set up those specialized units that can take on these special cases? We don't need to set up an EFCC for rape.
And then you recall what happened or what is happening with SARS, which is a specialized unit. So people will say, so what if we have a specialized unit for rape? Seeing what happened with SARS. But definitely we need to sort this out. Next to that, FG warns states against reopening schools. Others, recall we talked about that. And, you know, what was quite interesting about Oyo's case is they said they are preparing ahead of, you know, examinations. Talking about the, you know, primary 6, JSS3 and SS3 examinations. I'm wondering, isn't it a national examination? But you know what? Page 26 of the Daily Trust, which is good, right? And then see this one, concerns Mount as access to fertilizer.
Sorry, I don't think people realize why opening schools is more dangerous than for...
People or the governor?
Why opening schools is not even a good idea right now. It's not about the children, because if we say the children are insulated, how about the grandparents to whom they're going to go back when they return from school?
Well, it'll be good to hear their thinking, actually. Let's see, maybe if we get those details.
Yeah.
And then we could examine those details on a point-by-point basis. Maybe on a precept upon precept, right?
Because, I mean, it's June 29th. So maybe they have data that, well,
you never can tell.
Final one, concerns Mounts as access to fertilizer shrinks. But, you know, behind the story is food. So it's not just fertilizer, there's food also. So it's on page 6 of the Daily Trust this morning. We'll leave it there.
The Guardian newspaper leads with, again, an insecurity story. Outrage as worsening insecurity hits North. This has been on since last week, and it is something that is very disconcerting, also included in the President's Democracy Day speech. Northern coalition insignificance, says presidency. Again, he who feels it knows it. Sack service chiefs now. We back to that topic? This is ethnic nationalities charging the president. FG gets 14-day ultimatum to end killings. Admit failure. Seek help. Khan tells president and governors. Interesting. There's a quote there you may want to find out who said that. The story continues on page 6. Right under the nameplate, of course, you see that picture of the governor of Rivers State. Right beside that, tension as resident doctors begin strike amid COVID-19. What we want from government by strikers. Strikers, wow. NARD exempts experts treating patients from action. It may worsen doctor-to-patient ratio and spike deaths. Find out who said that. PSN threatens industrial action. Oh no. Over PCN chairmanship. This is not the best of times right now for any state of emergency in the health sector. It's not the best of time. Nigerian Governors Forum, Toothless Bulldog, says Wike. FG Gencos may land in UK court over 13.2 billion naira electricity bill. And of course, that story on reopening of schools is also there. Find out more of that on the back page. We have sports fresh doubts over Edo 2020 as FJ insists on restriction of sporting activities. Adelabu wants PTF to scrutinize conditions of Nigerian athletes. That's one of 2 stories on the back page of the Guardian newspaper this morning. Markwe?
Let's take a look at Blueprint. I feel a little spoiled for choice now, but let's look at Blueprint. Federal government to resident doctors. Your strike, ill-timed, dangerous. That's according to the lead headline. Says lives lost, irreplaceable. ARD exempt members, that's the Association of Resident Doctors, exempt members attending to COVID-19 patients for 2 weeks. So they have given some concessions there as well. And I think that, it's actually taking quite a while for their requests to be, attended to. Page 6 will give you all the details, though. If you look just beneath the nameplate, don't reopen schools, viewing centers now, PTF tells states. When you have to, give this sort of warning to states, you have to ask what is going on. Is it that the state governors themselves don't realize what is going on? Edo 2020, Oshomale, Obaseki take case to Aso Rock. You look at the bottom there, 4.4 trillion naira power intervention. Stop playing the ostrich, Senate tells federal government. You find details continuing somewhere inside the paper. A number of other stories at the bottom for you, which I might leave you to do yourself. Let's leave it there for Blueprint.
Well, I'm not spoiled for choice, unfortunately. Take a look at Vanguard next now. And Edo 2020, APC governors fail to save Obaseki. That's what Vanguard is reporting here. They've got a lot of riders as well. APC's NWC meets Gambari. Incumbency doesn't guarantee victory. Oshomole says Obaseki, as APC member, will allow party primaries June 22. Oh, okay. Obaseki joins PDP tomorrow. No automatic ticket for him. PDP state's chair.
Really?
Join PDP now, Clark tells Obaseki. Says APC's treatment to Ambode Obaseki horrendous. APC leaders following due process, Ganduje. So that's what you see. And then Arewa youth groups gave FG 14-day ultimatum to end insecurity in the north. Does it work like that? Well, indigenous people of Katsina. Oh, this is IPOC. Oh, not IPOP, IPOC. Indigenous people of Katsina demand state of emergency. Northern Khan seeks end to insecurity in region. And then my troops are millions of Nigerians. Ango Abdullahi replies, presidency. Look at the back page, guys. The sports there. Good ones for some Nigerian players. Ndidi tops Man United transfer target. And Moses Simon signs 4-year non-contract. So good one for the players there. That's Vanguard this morning.
Okay, take a look at leadership briefly. Governors vow crackdown on bandits. Others, if I had a penny for how many times we've heard that statement, at least a couple. But that's what we have today. And
no going back.
I know. But you know what? That's the lead story right there. A couple of other stories on the front page of the leadership. But we'll leave it there this morning.
Okay, so that ends it with the look at some of the dailies. We're back in a moment. Just stay with us. Welcome back. Let's focus on situation, the handling of COVID and sundry matters. The figures are not going down. Well, this morning we've got Dr. Oke Ikechukwu, who is the Executive Director of Development Specs Academy. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program. Well, last time you were here, you expressed some concerns about how some things are going on. But today, it turns out that there are more things unfolding, dramatic albeit. But tell us about, what do you think of how we're handling this now? Because, I mean, when you look at this figure, almost week in, week out, they're not going down.
No, they are not going down, and it's only based on the projections, they are not expected to go down. Initially, we had low figures because of very, very low limited testing and also very limited physical movement. Now, physical movement has increased. I think that was the minister speaking who said they expect to do 500 in Abuja, 500 in Lagos. I don't know whether what he meant by that was testing, all of this within the next 2 weeks. Now, if you look at the rate of testing, The first conclusion you must draw is that it cannot, in the present circumstances, be a reliable index of the rate of infection and the spread of infection in many parts of the country. The second point to note is that with the challenges being faced by health workers and the Center for Disease Control and even the Presidential Committee itself or task force, we must admit that they are trying, given the constraints on the ground and around the table. They are human beings. They are people's parents. They are people's uncles, brothers, sisters, fathers, and mothers. And therefore, we must not expect that in an environment that has no real capacity for sustainable intervention in a situation of crisis, that once you constitute a committee, then that committee is automatically made up of magicians. No. There is no health care in the country. That has become apparent. And 3 months down the line, what does that tell us? Do we now have enough testing centers? Are hospitals better equipped? The answer to all these questions is no, which shows again that the national disposition to crisis management and crisis response is still to a very large extent bureaucratic. And why I'm also a little reluctant to join in hammering the committee is that even in nations with far greater human capacity, both in the medical and other sciences, they're recording massive casualties and deaths. Yes, there have been some explanations about climatic factors giving us some slight advantage, but the truth of the matter is that if 40% of the record of infections came after the lockdown, what it tells us is that to begin with, we didn't have the correct figures. Secondly, that there appears to be a correlation between the ease of lockdown and the upshoot in the number of infected persons. Thirdly, that testing tool, which I believe has also improved, is indicating that we have far and far less access to those to be tested. Let us assume the population of Abuja is 3 million, just for the purpose of argument. How many people can you test in a week? How many can you test in a day? How can you use the record of that test as an indication of the rate of infection in Abuja? It cannot work. And then you must also two other factors to take into account. One, the language of discussing the COVID thing, and then the elitist orientation of the interventions. And I'll start with the first one. You speak of people being quarantined. That could easily be described as care centers or intensive management or public health management, self-management units. It has a slightly less alarming effect on public consciousness. Then, if you look at the entire template for the intervention, it speaks of isolation and so many other things. You are in a house. The building is made up of 12 flats. Each of the flats has a minimum of 8 tenants. What do you expect? And that's why you live in flats. In come to another building, there are 12 rooms. Each of the rooms has 5 tenants, and they share facilities. What are you going to tell anybody about distancing? So the part of the crisis of collapse of social infrastructure is hitting us. And finally, on the same note, some basic things which epidemiologists and parasitologists should also have put into the cocktail of what is going into the public communication. If you go out to buy groundnut today in a bottle, you still buy the same groundnut you used to buy last year, in 1970, in 2003. It's in a bottle, transparent bottle, and it's covered. So you buy it on the road or in the supermarket. Question, how are these groundnuts cleaned before they are put in the bottle? The same way I believe our grandfathers and mothers used to do it. It is roasted or fried on the fire, then it's put in some kind of container and rubbed until the rough shell, the film on it is removed. They either throw it up until it goes. But on the average, most of the time, people just put it like this and blow to get rid of the chaff. What do you get, Chamberlain and colleagues? And yet, it has not occurred to us that part of the communication should go through market leaders, local government chairmen, town union presidents, and churches, so that basic personal habits be altered. You're driving around along the road, so you stop and call over somebody with groundnut, and that may be the last groundnut you eat. Anyway, but I think on the whole, the pain we are facing and the crisis on the table is that we've always been ill-equipped to deal with this. And
right,
the reaction and treatment of our medical personnel is also indicative of that.
Now, speaking about some of those communication and change of attitude, one wonders what kind of change do we or should we expect from that category of people, those categories of people, if they eventually let them know, look, this is real, this is how you intend to conduct yourselves. How are they going to adapt, doing things differently, not forgetting that, first of all, they'll tell you, economic considerations will take preeminence. They'll need to do those things to survive.
Yeah. Well, on a slightly mischievous note, I would say that probably some of them, given the circumstances under which they live, already have some organic immunity against a lot of things, because you find people living in places that are infested with a mosquito because it's all swampy, and nobody seems to have malaria. You do an inventory of the pharmacy shops around the place and dispensaries, and you find that they sell more of pain relievers and blood tonic and multivitamins than anti-malaria drugs. But you go now from your place in Lagos to go and spend a day or two there. You come back with malaria, both resistant and non-resistant. So, like I said, that's a bit on the mischievous side. They appear to have some kind of immunity. But the truth of the matter is that the environment is actually ill-equipped to handle the current crisis. But the communication at that level is not going to be done by Lai Mohammed. He is Minister of Information, Federal Republic of Nigeria. He is not a state commissioner of information. He is not a local government chairman. He's not a ward chairman, and he's not a councillor. Well, these are other layers of leadership whose primary duty is to interact with the people, confirm their needs, and bill it into anything they intend to do as public servants.
Dr. Kechuku, speaking about interacting with people.
At that level, yes.
Pardon me to jump in again. Speaking about communicating with people,
yes.
Some of those who we try to interact with, just out there, just find out what the thinking is about all of this. Is that, look, NCDC did revise the suspected and probable cases of the symptoms for COVID, and many of those happen to be symptoms of malaria. And then when we did speak to individuals in different areas, those down there, the impression they have is that, look, this is what I've been treating for several times. Why would they suddenly tell me that, number one, that this is COVID and I should present myself? That's on the one hand. And then secondly, assuming a lot more people will take on board those revised processes and symptoms and say, listen, haven't seen this revised document, I need to present myself. Aren't we at risk of overwhelming the system if everybody were to show up who have such symptoms? Can we handle it?
No, we cannot handle it. There's no capacity for it. At the level of equipment, there's no capacity. At the level of medication, there's no capacity. At the level of personnel, there's no capacity. There's also at the level of physical space, the capacity simply does not exist. Even the medical personnel that are on the job at the moment, you are aware that many of them lack equipment. Their lives are in danger because they are not sufficiently protected. And you're tempted to ask yourself, so what is the money, both donated and officially allocated for COVID, being spent on? You're building a house, you need bricklayers, you need all kinds of workmen. And it turns out that they are complaining they don't have shovels and headpan with which to carry sand in order to put the next floor of the building. You wonder what the money is being spent on. These are human beings, not part of the furniture in a place, people over whom others will cry if they go missing. It is not criminal to accept to be a medical doctor or a nurse or a paramedic. It is not. The state has a responsibility to make capacitated citizens efficient, since they've acquired some proficiency. So if I'm already equipped with knowledge, but I have no tools to work with, you can't allow me, you can't insist that I keep endangering my life. So that's a matter I think that should be addressed. It is not new, it's being consistent, it's been the pattern, and that's why I suspect they are going on strike, among other reasons. These matters should be addressed. I think that rather than see this as an opportunity to focus on blames and counter blames, is to focus on the fact that the Nigerian state is infrastructure barren at all levels, from the federal to local communities and wards and homesteads. And that the entire hierarchy of leadership, all the way down to wards, has failed and has continued to fail. Because in all the conversations we've had about this crisis since it began, the pandemic, it's always the federal government that's on everybody's lip. What is Buhari doing? Lai Mohammed said this. Certainly the federal government, in my view, has not been doing well on practically every other front. So even if it's doing well now, those who don't like the government will keep hitting at it. The other point to focus on is that besides Aso Rock and Abuja, leadership, there are no citizens of Abuja. There's nobody who is from the federal government. There are people who are from states, local governments, and wards. Where are their leaders? What is it they do every month when allocation comes?
It
Yes,
also
please.
now raises a question, because over time, that's a major element that we have also tried to emphasize over and over again. And of course, governors will tell you that they are doing their bit. That is why the federal government announced that interstate lockdown doesn't affect those who have to provide healthcare services. So the state governors have been doing their bit, they would say, and of course, many people in the various states and local governments and wards, as you have said. But what, in your opinion, is the missing link here? I wanted to ask you a question about the communication. I'll come back to that, but just to quickly follow up on what you're saying now. What is the missing link as far as communicating these things to the states and the citizens in each state? What is the missing link? Because we highlighted earlier that some people don't even believe that there is any such thing as coronavirus in their own environments. What is the missing link?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll take on the question of what people believe about coronavirus and then the matter of missing link. No, the missing link first. The missing link is at the level of values. In the last couple of decades, leadership no longer had anything to do with service. It revolved around getting a position, getting certain privileges, using the opportunity of the position and the privileges to separate yourself from the people, always being provided with security people. Your house will no longer be accessible even to your cousins in the village. And so you find that simultaneously, what used to go with leadership in the days of Sir Ahmadu Bello, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, Z. Kemayo Okpara, and all the other leaders, was that the leader was there to serve the interests of the people, even when sometimes the people themselves are not fully aware of it. Today, the leader is to create an empire, a private local government not accessible to anybody, with security personnel guarding him all the time for the rest of his life. Now, what that means is that the concept of service delivery is no longer part of the thinking of people who hold office. That's why I will be a local government chairman. All the roads I've been chairman, say, for 3 years. All the things I should do, all the municipal functions and services and infrastructure I should provide, I've done nothing about any of them. And I'm not embarrassed. I'm driving around in a massive Jeep. And everybody is praising me. So there's a demobilization from citizenship on account of the conduct. So the missing link is the complete absence of a sense of responsibility by those who hold public office. And a leadership recruitment template that has now become internalized, whereby you be my PA or SA or SSA, I have 900 of you, most of you I don't know their names, but you get allowance every week. I've created about 1,000 people who think public office is collecting money without doing anything. And they become the next wave of leaders. I mean, some years back, we went on a tour. That was during the NIPS program, National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. We had gone to, I think, Nasarawa. The community that probably produces the most gold in this country is Bukuyum. And we went there on a visit. It's, to say that it's appalling is just to appear to be saying something people will understand. I'd never seen a place like that. But then in the course of it, an official also came to meet with us. You would think he dropped from the moon, the quality of what he was wearing, the kind of vehicle he came in and the convoy, and that's at the local level. So what do you think would happen? Everybody approaches you looking for money. audacious something. And so the primary responsibility of leadership, which is nurturing the people, both at the physical, spiritual, and social levels, disappears completely. That's all. There is no, if I'm a chairman of a Yaba, of local government or whatever, anywhere in Kebbi State or Kano or Sokoto, what is it I do every month? Let's us suppose a local government chairman, I get every month 100 million, and many get a lot more than that. What is it spent on? Do the people have access to me? So you find a growing circle of individuals who are not taking on the appropriate sense of social responsibility.
You know, on one hand,
you had raised the matter of what people believe.
Okay. Well, just
you want to let that slide?
Before we go to that, I'm still stuck on one hand at the groundnut example you gave. It's still in my mind. It's hard to erase that. But because I mean, some of us can't do without groundnuts. But earlier on, you also mentioned something about bureaucracy, and I'd like to pick on that. You said that generally Nigeria's response to crisis management is largely bureaucratic. And a lot of people say it's not just crisis management. A lot of things are bureaucratic. And if we want to move away from that, what kind of system do we need to put in place such that if something like this comes up or any other thing that needs us to be nimble on our feet, how do we address it?
You know, my attitude to social intervention is to move away from ought to feasible. What we ought to put in place is already in so many proposals and documents and advisories. They are there. What would make a thing feasible is the political economy, the interplay of power and money in the environment. So if you say, what should we put in place? There's nothing wrong with our constitution as it is, once you operate it correctly. So the problem is not what to put in place. What to put in place is in place, but the necessary human capital has not evolved to match it. Now, what point am I taking further from there? If you want to go for public office and you want to go for state governor, there's a certain amount of money you must pay to collect the form. So already only those who can afford that can vie for governorship. No matter the kind of brilliant ideas you have, it will not take you anywhere. That's some level of exclusion. That already has class character. And okay, you want fuel to be free, to be cheap in Nigeria, and you have the best designs and protocols for it. But there happen to be people who are more powerful than you, who are making money by keeping fuel expensive, and they knock you and your proposal out. And that's a reality you have to contend with. So coming down specifically to your question, what do we need to do? Public education. No, before public education, at whatever level you are, impact lives. Begin to find out a connection between the title of your holding and the deliverables associated with it. So it can only be to call on specific leaders to begin to set examples so others can emulate. And we've seen it happen in places. We're still seeing it happen. But for a national template, what national template will you bring up now? Nepotism is dealing with everybody. Hunger, incompetence, insecurity. So if you bring, first of all, there's no national consensus to attract enough attention for solidarity.
Let's get your response on this, Dr. Okechukwu, because, I mean, the Minister of Aviation, he's announced that suspension, and then they're going to sanction executive jets for flying persons other than those who they had initially indicated, according to him. And then there was our concert in Abuja. These are all part of what they think shouldn't be happening, how we're handling what do people believe about COVID, which fuels their actions. What's your impression about how all of that is turning out?
First of all, I think we separate the legality of the issues from the morality of the behavior of some of the people concerned. If it's against the law to give information about a flight different from the actual flight schedule and content, then there must be a penalty associated with it. So if ExecuJet has violated the law, it must face the penalty. It will be a deterrent to others. It will also show that however you choose to look at it, there's some measure of rule of law in these matters. But it would be wrong to stretch the penalty beyond the lawful penalty just because we're in a COVID situation. We need not always set extreme examples. Otherwise, the road to salvation will be littered with only dead people who were used as examples. And nobody followed them after seeing what happened to them.
Before you move to the morality,
If have violated the law.
But could you also respond
the morality of it, of course, sorry.
Yeah, could you respond to those who also think that, first of all, something, look, these have always been happening. There's several people who have been flying on commercial basis, and so are they suddenly reacting to this because there was a hue and cry on social media? As a matter of fact, you did see there's a tweet right there which is saying the customs boss was pictured flying with his new bride. President's PA flight to Lagos. Obaseki was in different states yesterday. Also, Modu Sheriff traveled from Abuja to Maiduguri. But now they are reacting because Naramali flew to Abuja. But just highlighting how movement has been happening at that level. So some think, wait a minute, are they trying to fool people or deceive some persons by saying this, or the law is the law, whoever is caught?
No. I think there are two issues to separate from here. The fact that there can be circumstances under which flights are allowed even during the lockdown is happening all over the world, the US. Even in the case of the UAE last week, they say they can now allow international transit flights to land in Dubai, change passengers and go. So it's happening, it's been happening. The second thing is that even the executives under reference at the moment, they claimed, the report from the authorities said that we were misinformed. They said they were going to carry a judge on special assignment, then they carried somebody else, which means there are circumstances under which you can fly some specific officials. And state officials usually might have national situations that would allow. So the point to note is that you can't just walk into the airport and fly a plane. There must be protocols you follow. Now, the point I'll concede to some of those who are complaining is that they are suspecting that there may be executive or maybe elite abuse of that window. It is possible, but then I will only be speculating. It is possible, and in our kind of environment and the degree of lack of genuine discipline in the leadership for a long time now, it's likely to be happening. But again, that is pure speculation. I do not know whether that is the case. But to suggest that, it's because he carried a particular person, flights have been going on under whatever conditions they stipulated. A plane went out of this country to bring in relief for us. Another plane went out to bring Nigerians from another country. Did they not get protocol clearance from here? Across other nations they flew, and where they landed and where they picked them from. So let's separate fact from hysteria in these matters. That way, the conversation becomes a little easier to manage.
All right, then, Dr. Okeke-Chukwu, Executive Director, Development Specs Academy. Thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Always a pleasure to have you on.
It's all right.
All right, we're back in a moment, everyone. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're still keeping our focus on the COVID and sundry matters. We've got Mr. Abdulrazak Bello Barkindo joining us. He's the head of media of the Nigeria Governors Forum. That's Media and Public Affairs. Good morning. Good to see you again, and thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning, Chamberlain. Good morning, the rest of you.
Well, yes, indeed. So much focus on what needs to be done across different states in the country. But let's start off with this one. The COVID. I know that there's still this interstate lockdown, and yes, we're expected to stick to a stricter censor, but it appears as though what we see on paper may be different from what's operational in reality. So what's the impression, what's the thinking at the moment of governors in terms of perhaps how the country, the states, seems to be handling COVID-19 at the moment?
Good morning. I think on a general note, COVID-19 still remains a very crucial and critical part of, our daily living. There has been a shift, really, from isolations and, lockdowns to herd immunity. what is happening today is that there is a general opening up or a gradual opening up of the economy, especially in terms of manufacturing and agriculture. And, governors have been examining the situation day by day. And last week there was a report by the Governor Okowa Committee, who was mandated to interface with the Presidential Task Force and to see how the nation can ease itself out of the situation. So I think the situation is gradually improving, but COVID is not going away. It's still around. And the most important thing is for everybody to observe the protocols and continue, the new normal.
I mean, originally, the interstate lockdown was an idea from the NGF. But from what we have seen, and that's just a follow-up, from what we have seen so far, obviously, this is being observed in the breach, and I mean, we have it on paper, but in reality, I mean, even for air travels as well. And the big question is this something that you are worried about? And I'm talking about the NGF. And if so, are we going to face the reality and say, well, this is not working, let's just remove it altogether or put stricter measures in place?
Yes, I agree with you that it's being observed in the breach. And that is because there are a few bad eggs in the Nigerian police force who do not, live by regular regulations. When this idea was mooted, governors felt that because the federal government restricted movement in 3 areas, that is the FCT, Lagos State, and Ogun State, they felt there was a need to restrict, the spread of the disease. Remember that this disease was brought into this country from another country. And it was observed that by restricting movement in 3 states, there was a likelihood that some people might escape through the few loopholes or windows and get to other states. So state governors decided that all other states should take, their own measures depending on their, capabilities and situations. But over time, there have been complaints. And I remember that the Inspector General of Police had to be invited to come and, explain and, of course, listen to what the governors have to say about the breaches and get him on the same page so that the situation would be ameliorated. But unfortunately, the few bad eggs in the police have run everything down. And this had led to the spike, in the spread of the disease. But so far, I think the controls are coming back in place, even though, we're easing up the situation. But there are certain things that you cannot control, regardless of how hard you try. And that is why we have what it is today. But generally, I think there's been an improvement. The breaches are, diminishing, rather.
Is security one of those areas? Because, I mean, some governors, they talk about how frustrated they are with security agencies who either were extorting motorists when they have those checkpoints, which is supposed to put everybody in check, or they collude with them by allowing people just to move at night on the roads.
A lot of unspeakable things have happened during the lockdowns, and that was why the easing up of the, movement took place. But there are still certain regulations in place which are still being observed in the breach. But the most important thing is to curtail, the spread of this disease. And remember that even the World Health Organization commended Nigeria for its approach to curbing this disease, which was the targeting sampling. And so far, even though the disease has spread to a lot of states, there have been, tremendous effort at making sure that it did not spread into communities, except, of course, the communities that remain recalcitrant. And these communities have been few and far between. And so far, I think these measures would continue to be observed and regulated until such a time that, the entire community is aware. It's also a function of awareness. A lot of people, just believe this is a farce. And it's unfortunate that people are dying because of that kind of belief. But there's things that governors cannot do anything about. Governors have put measures in place. States have task forces all over the country, awareness and information have been going around, but of course, you know how Nigerians behave. Sometimes people just decide on their own that, you know, because of this seeming distrust between the leaders and the people, there is this dysfunctionality that continues, you know, to mitigate the positive measures that are in place. So I believe, you know, in due course, these measures will take better effect, and you know, by then there would probably have been a vaccine, and then things would go on as normal. But of course, we have to realize, like, you know, that there's going to be a new normal, whether we like it or not. And people who think they would want to continue to live in denial may be victims. We're not happy about that. We're not praying for that. But there's a likelihood that there are people who will never agree that this thing exists, and, you know, certain adverse effects may befall them. But that would be unfortunate.
Well, you said there are some things that the governors can't do anything about, but perhaps there is one, and that is to define what is essential or non-essential travel, because some of the breaches that you also alluded to are as a result of whether the travel is essential or non-essential. Many VIPs travel across, you know, borders of states, even air travel and all of that, with random abandon. So is there any way we can say, okay, how do we define, let me ask you that, how do we define, or how do governors, if you know, define what is essential or non-essential travel? Have election issues also become essential travels? Because I think that is really the major issue, because if people see their leaders travel without justification as far as the people are concerned, then they will just seem to follow the lead of the people that are leading them.
Yeah, I'll have to be sincere with you. I've had cause to discuss this with my Director General when I saw that, you know, people were complaining about the movement of, you know, governors from one place to another. But such movements have turned out, you know, to be very essential. And there are times, or there were times when the president himself would invite a governor to have a conversation over one issue or another. So these are things that you cannot, you know, stop anyway. But of course, there are other travel that have been that can be defined as non-essential, and they have taken place, and that is because there are certain emergencies, you know, in different parts of the country. And if you're talking about these exclusive travels that have taken place, if you're talking about governors, they have immunity and they have access to, you know, these things. And I believe that even if they traveled without being categorized as essential travel, they also are responsible people who could observe the protocols. There are countries where, you know, there were no lockdowns and people have traveled because, you know, they observe, you know, the protocols very, very properly. And right. I believe that people in that capacity, I mean, would be able to travel without necessarily breaching the COVID-19 protocols. But yes, like you said, people should lead by example. And when these examples are breaching, you know, the regulations in the country, obviously the common man would think, well, if he could travel, why can't I? After all, I'm the voter. But I think the most important thing is not the travel. The most important thing is observing the protocols and making sure that you do not spread the disease. And these have, as far as the VIPs are concerned, have been observed very properly, I believe.
So are you saying now that people can actually travel if they observe the protocols? Because that's what it comes across as though you're saying.
I wouldn't say people can travel because I don't have an authority to let people travel. But I'm saying in countries where the lockdowns have not been observed, it's because people are able to stand by regulations. The lockdown, if you look at it critically, is to, you know, compel people to abide by the protocols. I would think that if we were living in places like the Scandinavian countries, there wouldn't have been any, you know, need to have lockdowns. Remember that there are countries that didn't have lockdowns because people followed regulations. So the most important thing is to follow the regulations. If you are, you know, civilized enough, I would say, civilized enough to follow regulations, I think you can travel. But I don't have the authority to ask people to travel anyway.
But, you know, some other persons may interpret that as though well, okay, if we have to, we can travel by road as well, and then we'll try and observe those protocols. And so all of those interstate lockdown may not be necessarily achieving the desired effect if people interpret it that way, don't you think?
Yes, I think so. And it would be laughable for anybody to believe that he can travel just because, okay, assuming that you go to the motor park and you are asked to be only 3 or 4 in a cab. I don't think the cab driver would want to, drive at a loss. So these are the kind of things that bring about the breaches. It's because, there are a lot of people in the informal sector of the economy whose day-to-day living, okay, look at that. When people travel in such hordes and cannot control where they sit, do not have, these really are the kind of, vehicles that move the disease from one place to another. Assuming people would observe these protocols or the COVID-19 protocols properly, there wouldn't have been these excesses. But there are policemen all over the country who are supposed to stop these things happening. But they don't do that. A lot of them, or the few bad eggs among them, would just rather, make economic capital of the situation. And that's unfortunate. Because if we do not have, you don't expect governors to go to the borders and start arresting people, even though they have done that in the past. And they have been able to, fish out a lot of people who are, but there haven't been any punitive measures against the few policemen who would let vehicles pass even though they know they are overloaded. And that's some of the, worrisome things on the platform of the governors. And they have called the Inspector General to make this known to him. And as you can see, not much has been done to achieve what the governors intended.
At some point, the northern governors had some meeting, and then we were told that they agreed that they had to do something about Amajure such that they don't become a hazard to everyone else, up there. But afterwards, there were vehicles, there were trucks, they were found in different parts of the country, including down south. So was there any conversation, afterwards? Was there any resolution to say, look, they were not supposed to move that far? Or what was the thinking? How did that happen?
Let me make this clear that I do not speak for the Northern Governors Forum, but I know that at the Nigeria Governors Forum level or platform, there have been very, very intense conversations over the Almajiri problem. And these have been tackled in different ways because different governors have different perspectives about how to tackle these issues. But another area of clarity is the fact that Almajiris don't move to the south. Let's take this point clearly. The people who are moving to the south are economic, migrants. They are not Almajiris. Almajiris seek education where there is Islamic, where there are Islamic institutions. So the people moving to the south are going there to do their business. When you describe them as Almajiris, then you try to, you probably oversimplify the issue. You just assume that any young or minor from the north is an Almajiri. That's not it. There are a lot of people traveling to the south to, do some businesses. They are not necessarily Almajiris. So the Almajiri issue revolves only around the northern part of the country and does not move to the south.
Well, actually, Mr. Brakindo, we actually did have comments from those governors because those who were found in those trucks were children. And then they were found, in fact, some states had to intercept and then turn them back. So can we actually say those ones were there to also carry out their businesses?
Well, there are communities in the north where children seek their livelihoods on their own. They don't necessarily go there. Okay, if Almajiris move to the south, what education are they going to get in the south? Are there Islamic teachers, say, in Enugu or Port Harcourt that would, camp Almajiris? I don't think so. There are a lot of children who think that they are man enough to go and look for a living. And these are the ones who believe that, there are areas in the south where certain services can be provided. And remember, a lot of these people are probably not even Nigerians. Even though, they are Hausas, they may not necessarily be Nigerians because the, northern part of the country has open borders with certain parts, other countries from across the borders. And they migrate into this country, unfettered. So there are a lot of people who move in the name of Hausas or in the name of Fulanis who are not it. And these are the kind of people who do not even abide by our rules. If you look at the streets, for instance, in Nigeria, you will see people breaching the traffic regulations. And that's because they are unaware and completely oblivious of these traffic regulations, because they are not the same regulations that, subsist in their, countries. Some of them come from Francophone countries, and our traffic regulations are not the same. So if you see people driving the NAPEPs and things like that around the cities, you would observe that these are not Nigerians, because they are not driving according to the Nigerian regulations. So, and these are the kind of people that also feel that the northern part of the country does not provide the kind of opportunities that they seek, and they migrate down south. I'm not saying this is a hard fact, but these are the kind of things that you would observe when you look at the problems that we have in this country.
No, you just raised a major issue. In fact, major issues about border control and all that. I wish we had time to look into that. But let's talk about the 10th COVID-19 teleconference meeting of the NGF barely a week ago, and some of the resolutions, that came up. One of them is that, each state should come up with a modality for reopening the economy. And just this morning, the headlines have it that the federal government is warning states on reopening of schools. I mean, we have Oyo State already saying from June the 29th, primary 6, GSS 3, SS 3 would return to school to prepare for examinations. And it begs the question, is that the modality that you or the NGF asked for?
No, like I said, the federal government ab initio had made statements about the FCT, Lagos and Ogun State. And at the platform, the NGF platform, governors decided that each state could, approach this matter according to, its perspectives. And obviously, certain states would see these things. I mean, remember that there were certain states that didn't even have any regulations. If you look at Cross River State, for instance, people were moving around very freely, and they refused to, that's probably the governor's perspective. And I think I have seen people commend Cross River State for its, its actions on the COVID-19 things. And there are certain states that have been very, very firm. If you look at Kaduna State, for instance, the governor had to go to the border between Kaduna and Abuja and, place boulders on the highway so that nobody could cross. Despite that, people brought passengers to one end of the boulder and they crossed over on foot and then took another taxi into town. So there are strict measures that are supposed to, curb, the spread of this disease. But there are also, like I said, recalcitrant Nigerians who decide that whatever measures you put in place, they're going to breach them. Now, talking about education, each state would approach education according to its, strengths and what probably the governor thinks would help, further, either economic activities, education, and, agriculture. And sometimes the committees that states set up come up with these regulations and say, we are now ready to have, to open up in this little measure. And they have been taking this. Whether they backfire or they succeed is another issue entirely. But different states have taken these things in different ways. And I believe so far, not many have had problems with their approaches. But on the other hand, examinations and things like that, some states are afraid that, the educational calendar is being staggered, to the disadvantage of the young people who are aspiring to, further their, their prospects in school. So some of these states take actions because they believe that these schools are ready to abide by the protocols. But whether or not they succeed is another thing altogether.
Regarding the one other item there, which was rape, I mean, yes, they had that resolution when they said, well, states should have to address the relevant laws on gender-based violence. They also did recommend that they domesticate some of the child rights acts for the states that have not. So when they come up with that resolution, is it that, did they give a timeline as to when they expect states to go ahead and do that? Because some states have not for several years. They've not even touched it with a pole.
Yeah, I agree with you. This is a very unfortunate situation. The Nigerian governors were addressed by the Minister for Women Affairs, that's Dame Pauline Tallen, and she gave a very graphic picture of the kind of injury this does to the Nigerian society. I don't think any adult who is educated enough to understand, the plight of the girl child would allow his state to run without this. But there are certain other considerations, and most of them are religious. Among the states that do not probably have not domesticated these, I think about 10 of them are from the north. And I want to believe that from, the views that were stated during the last or the 10th teleconference, I think a lot of people or a lot of governors are going to face this squarely. I know that some of them have called meetings since that day, and the resolutions are yet unknown. But I believe that more states are going to maybe tackle the Child Rights Act and the Violence Against Persons Act very, very seriously. So I look forward to sincere and very serious resolution of this issue, because it's becoming another pandemic, as she described it. These issues of rape are just rearing their ugly heads all over the country, and it's really unfortunate that we are not able to protect the girl child in this country, and that's a very serious issue. But I believe, spewing from what happened in the last meeting, I believe governors are going to tackle it very, very effectively, because that was their opinion at the meeting.
You say there were religious considerations. What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, the Almajiri issue is one of those things, a lot of people, or a lot of parents, for instance, the Kaduna state government has criminalized, allowing your child to go to the Almajiri schools, or has even criminalized, being a Malam who now puts together more than 20 children that are not registered to come and, take, religious learning. And this has been part of the problems that have led to the lack of domestication of this regulation. And by the time, these twin issues are addressed properly, I think this, the rape thing and
just one moment. I just want to clear something. I'm wondering what religious considerations have got to do with the issue of gender-based violence.
Well, apart from, sincerely, this is an inexplicable, situation, but a lot of people believe that the woman should be subservient, or should, I mean, even if you look at our justice system, when a woman goes out of her home or out of her way to report the male for domestic violence, don't you see how the police address the matter? They would think it's always the woman who has a problem. Even when, obviously, the male could be, this would be either religious or cultural. And it's the same thing if a family is barren. The problem is always directed at the woman. I mean, we're going into gender issues here, but administratively, you can see that even our system does not properly encourage the woman to, be independent and express herself freely. And these are also probably enshrined in how people look at their religion. Like the man who believes that he could marry 4 wives because the religion says so. But the religion also says you can marry 4 wives if you can love all of them equally. And I think that is almost humanly impossible. But these are the considerations that lead to certain infractions that affect society. These are things that we can also not
give us a minute
address
or
administratively.
Just give us a minute or two to take a break, and when we come back, we can finish up on some of these other considerations you're bringing into the conversation. Thanks for staying with us, Mr. Barkindo. The issue you were raising, you took it on another, very interesting tangent, which is that of ethnic considerations. So we have a tripartite of sorts. There is the issue of religion, the religious considerations which you brought in, the ethnic, coloration into this whole conversation, and then that of gender-based arguments. Now, gender is a big issue, something that's of global proportion. How we domesticate all of this in Nigeria on the one hand, and in the different states. Now, that's a big argument, isn't it?
Yes, it is a big argument, and I believe that we are fortunate to begin to have, the kind of leaderships that see these arguments as, necessary. I was really amazed at the level at which the forum looked at, the Nigeria Governors Forum looked at this matter when the Minister for Women Affairs addressed them. And I think she was very passionate about it, which was one commendable thing. And the other thing is, most of the people who contributed in that meeting also addressed this issue very, very deeply, and gave some of, the most touching examples in their various states of how or why, they should make rules that properly address these issues. Particularly, I think one interesting thing is that one of the main speakers was the governor of Plateau State, who felt like, even though he's a Christian, there was need, as the chairman of that forum, the Northern Governors Forum, to bring this to the table and address it. Because I remember somebody wanted to make certain comments about it, and he said, no, this is for us to tackle. And for him to say this is for us to tackle means he has taken ownership of this issue, even though he's a Christian. And that means that there is probably in going forward going to be a very, very strong legislation against, the child's right, breaching the Child's Rights Act and the Violence Against Persons regulation. And these perspectives never used to exist, because, when people can only address things against the background of where they come from and what their culture says and things like that, and they don't listen to other reasons that are coming from the other divides, it makes, solving the problem very, very difficult. But today, because of the unison in how they reasoned and how they thought and the kind of assurances that they gave to the Minister for Women Affairs, I believe that we're going to see certain improvements in legislation very soon.
Well, is that to say that you are optimistic that those other 10 states that have not even domesticated the act will do so? Because that addresses how do we convince people that that wasn't a political resolution, given those differences?
No, I was in that meeting, and it was a virtual meeting, but I saw, the depth of commitment, and I saw the kind of arguments that were advanced, and I know that based on that, governors are going to begin to be proactive in dealing with these issues. But remember, it's about time. These problems all are intertwined. You cannot solve one without touching the other. And so it makes it difficult for even states that have decided that they are going to remain within the cultural confines and continue to advance those arguments that don't address these issues are not going to succeed. Because if you are going to solve the problem of COVID-19, for instance, has made us, arrive at a new, destination. And this destination means you have to see these problems clearly and touch on them. So it's obvious that these things are going to be addressed whether we like it or not, whether the governors like it or not. And they have seen that, and they have made those statements that are not, for me, political.
Well, it's good to hear, and hopefully, who knows, we may see some of these debates in the National Assembly, amending the laws to that respect, if need be anyway. But let me switch on to this other matter about the NGF also. Because, there are comments in the dailies, Rivers State Governor referring to the Nigeria Governors Forum as toothless bulldogs, and then it leaves many asking questions and wondering, well, wait a minute, he's a member of this forum. Why is he saying this? Is it that he knows they can do something and then they're not doing it? What do you think is going on?
I think on this I'd plead the fifth because it's a political issue and the NGF does not dabble into political matters. Remember, I have always told you that we have 6 core mandate areas and they don't include politics. We are a strictly policy and governance, institution. And when it comes to politics, of course, we have burnt our fingers before. And for that, we have been able to, raise or upgrade our institution to, a modern institution. Last year in 2019, I remember we didn't resume office until May. We were working from all over the world. Wherever you were, you could, function as an official of the Governors Forum through your computer. So we didn't start virtual meetings and, virtual offices today. We've been doing it since, and that is because whenever it's political time or election time, we try to avoid the office so that we don't dabble into political issues. So I'm not going to suggest anything as far as what the Governor of Rivers State, His Excellency Nyesom Wike said. But I can also add quickly that the entire context of that statement revolved around the progressive governors, because that was an APC and PDP issue. It had nothing to do with the Governors Forum. But of course, like the Palestinians would say, we have the right to insult, Yasser Arafat, but you don't. So I'm not going to talk about that.
Okay, at least a good thing you didn't plead the fifth when it had to do with the rape matter, so we're glad to hear that one. But could you tell us, I mean, maybe not directly the views of your position as spokesperson of NGF, maybe just on a different note on this one, but still related to the NGF or some governors. Is there any thinking whatsoever, do you think, or do you think that eventually in the future they may consider that? Because look, if it happens to one governor, a second governor, then if they happen to be the strongest pressure group in the country, all of these actions may be chipping away at that influence that they have, and it may, in the long run, pull the rug off their feet. So do you think that maybe in the future, they may sit down and take a look at this and say, wait a minute, we may need to address this moving forward?
No, Chamberlain, I think, sincerely speaking, both, we have quite a large chunk of governors from the PDP and the APC in equal measure in the Nigeria Governors Forum. And then we have an ABGA governor. The other two parties, the APC and PDP, have their governors fora. There's a Progressive Governors Forum and the PDP Governors Forum, and they both have their chairman and spokespersons and everything. And ABGA, because of, his situation as a minority, the only governor from that party may not likely have a governors forum, but I believe they have different vehicles for addressing their political issues and differences. That has nothing to do with the Nigeria Governors Forum, actually.
Well, we have to thank you very much for the time that you've taken to speak with us this morning. We have been speaking with the head of Media and Public Affairs Nigeria Governors Forum, Abdulrazak Bello Barkindo. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
All right, we're back in a moment. Please stay with us. On this matter, the Publicity Secretary of the Nigeria Association of Resident Doctors joins us, Dr. Stanley Igbogu. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We thought this matter was done and dusted, and all of a sudden we hear that Nigeria Association of Resident Doctors are on strike. What's going on?
Hello. Good morning, Chamberlain.
Hello, can you hear me?
Good morning. Yes, I can hear you.
All right. We thought that this matter, following the meeting you had with members of the National Assembly last week, that this issue had been resolved. But to hear that the strike was going on, it was a surprise. Does that mean that the intervention was not strong enough?
Yes. To say the least, the government didn't respond as we planned in our ultimatum. Recall that on the 30th of May 2020, we issued a 14-day ultimatum to the federal government that elapsed on the 13th of June. Then, after that, the expiration of the ultimatum, the government could not respond to most of the demands the association made. And we had a meeting on the 14th of June and looked at the responses from the government, and we noted that most of our challenges have not been solved, vis-a-vis lack of provision of personal protective equipment to our members. And secondly, the lack of insurance cover for our members that are working in our different hospitals. Let me also state here that I want to debunk the statement made by the Minister of Labor and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige, yesterday night, where he stated that the reason why resident doctors went on strike is because of the COVID inducement allowance. That is not true. We went on strike because we don't have the necessary equipment to work. The government at all levels, both the federal and the state government, has refused to give us the necessary equipment we need to work. As I speak to you now, over 40 of our members, over 200 of our members have been infected with coronavirus disease, and over 10 of them have actually died from this disease, and that is not acceptable to us. How do we go to war with empty hands? So these are the things we looked at, and as an association, we decided we cannot continue that way. We decided to take the decision of proceeding on an indefinite strike action on the 15th of June, 2020.
Okay, but at that time, there was conversation between, the National Assembly, House of Reps, had tried to broker peace. They invited several of those ministers concerned. They demonstrated intent, and that conversation was going on. And so when the strike then came up, isn't that going to be injurious to all the attempts that they have made to see that this is solved? Because recently, the Speaker, I think he put up a statement calling on the NERD to shelve the strike such that you could give them a chance to eventually see this to fruition.
Thank you very much. Recall that in that meeting that we had with Minister of Labor and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige, he actually stated that he was going to pay us our inducement allowance as at last week. But now we are in a new week and nothing has been, we've not gotten the payment as we speak now. Then even the promises that were made in that meeting that personal protective equipment will be provided to our state and federal teaching hospitals, they are not available. And as we speak now, government said they have provided insurance premium for over 5,000 health workers, but we don't have it on record. So these are the reasons. These are all promises they've made in the past, but we've not seen the fulfillment of all these promises. And these are the things our members looked at and decided that we cannot continue that way. We want the government to come to the negotiation table so that we can discuss and get reliable outcome from this, our discussion. So that is what we are looking at. The Speaker intervened, and we are happy with that. And even the Chairman, Health Committee on Health, Dr. Honorable Sinunu, he was involved, and they've been useful. But then we are talking about implementation of all these promises that have been made to us. So our members think we are not protected, and we decided to dance on the 15th of June, 2020.
Okay, well, since you referred to the Minister of Labor, let's even listen to some of what he said so we can put it in proper perspective.
It won't be given to everybody at the same time because we are going to file the things into the IP system and it will start going. So once it starts tomorrow, I'm hopeful, being an electronic injection of funds, they can finish everything by Thursday or latest Friday this week. Protective personal equipment should be given to them. But you know that it's not only them that are in the health sector. We have other people, we have nurses, we have ICU biotechnologists, we have people working in the mortuaries, we have people in the in the accident and emergency. And so when these PPEs are brought, they are given to the hospital management to distribute according to need. Yes, doctors are frontline people, but there are other people also in the front line.
How do you respond to what he just said?
Yes, I listened very attentively to what he just said, but the truth is that these PEPs are lacking. And as we speak now, we don't have them. Now we have other health workers, nurses and midwives, who have also been infected by this dangerous virus. But someone has to speak out about what is happening in the healthcare system in Nigeria. That is what we are trying to do. These things are not available, and the nurses, the pharmacists, they know that it's not available in our hospital, but the doctors have decided to speak out so that this will be corrected. That is why we are saying government...
Okay, just a minute, pardon me. When those PPEs, assuming they are there, and then they give them to the hospital management to distribute, Is the NERD going to strike that off the demands, or will it contribute to you calling off the demand in addition to the payment, which you said is being made and will be completed soon?
Chamberlain, let me start by telling you that once the PEPs are available to our respective hospital, I want to tell you that most of the chief medical directors will distribute these PPEs to us. Now, let me tell you, out of all the federal and state teaching hospitals, everybody's complaining that we don't have PPEs. Now, if these PPEs have been sent to all the chief medical directors, are you telling me that all of them connived and decided not to release it to the resident doctors? That is the ARD of all the respective centers. I don't want to agree with that. I've asked my CMD because I was a former president of the Association of Resident Doctors in Nairobi, and it's clear to me that these PPEs have not been given in adequate quantities to them. Let me tell you that since I started over 100 days, since this pandemic started on the 27th of February, 2020, all the PEPs I have used, I procure them myself. How can a resident doctor who is not resident doctors that are not being well paid continue to procure PEPs with their hard-earned money? And also some state tertiary institutions are not helping matters. Can you imagine Abia State University Teaching Hospital, Absolute, still owing her workers over 16 months arrears? Imo State University Hospital is also owing arrears of over 6 months to our members. How do we continue to work in that? And on top of that, we don't have personal protective equipment to work with. So these things are injustice being meted against our average Nigerian doctors. And we have decided to speak out so that this thing will be corrected once and for all, Chamberlain.
You know, speaking of, I mean, the moves by the federal government, the minister also sounded confident that NARD would call off the strike. In fact, he said in the coming hours or days, because these, monies are being paid across board. Is that the case?
I want to tell you that we are not strike mongers. Once our demands are met, we will quickly come back to work. That is the truth. Once our demands are met, so if government feels that our demands are minor and things they can sort easily, then let them go ahead and do it, and we'll be happy to go back to work. So for us, we are ready. We want to listen to them. We want to see what they want to offer to us. And once it's acceptable, we'll convey our members across the country and we'll resume work. So hopefully, if they want to do the needful, they should do that as soon as possible and we'll go back to work. But that decision to go back to work cannot be taken by one person, not even me, not even the president of Association of Resident Doctors, Dr. Ali Yusufumbo. But will be taken by all the center presidents across the 30 states of the country.
Yeah, we look forward to your members going back to work, because this is definitely not the time for this kind of strike. But we have to thank you very much for your time this morning, Dr. Stanley.
Let me also state,
I'm sorry, we are completely out of time here, but we have to thank you very, very much for your time. Publicity Secretary, NARD, Dr. Stanley Igbogu, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, we are back in a moment to take some of your own feedback, so please do stay with us.
Welcome back. Musa Mohammed, we're starting with your comments. You say, so long as we keep seeing what we see in the country and how those in power keep breaking the rules they put in place, the masses will never take them serious. That is why COVID-19 numbers will continue to rise, he thinks.
Well, Kennedy Nephew thinks that our current political leaders are in no wise guided by the tenets, concept, and practice of democracy. They play party politics, according to him, that would allow political clans wield authorities arbitrarily instead of the real development experts we put in.
This one by Tobechukwu is a two-part tweet, but I'll just take this first part. You can look at the second one on our Twitter thread. Says, it was talking about the lackadaisical attitude of the citizens towards COVID-19 pandemic. It's indeed worrisome, he says. The interesting thing is that the testing numbers are still poor when compared to the population. Markwe?
Well, we have a few mails. This one is from John Bull. Amai Yevo, please do forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. This one says, in as much as what they did at Jabi Mall was very wrong, what happened to those who organized Abba Kyari's burial? selective justice will remain a major problem of this country. God help us. That's from Jumbo.
Who's going to build us out with Chobi? From what? Choji Pam, Dr. Pam, you have a very long email.
Honestly.
Yeah,
oh
but
dear.
You know, Dr. Choji is just really concerned about the primary healthcare centers. In part, the very long epistle, as you call it, says training and equipping of PHCs are the most important steps to tackle any public health problem, in this case, COVID-19. There is absolutely no other way around it. PHCs have been effective against polio, measles, and so on. And eventually, when a vaccine is ready, would you adequately distribute them via PHCs? It's a long mail, but that's the meat of the matter.
There you go, bailing us
Okay,
out.
Dr. Palmer, I hope you got the meat of your comments. Well, thank you all for those. We do appreciate them. Just keep them coming through. We will see you again tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain Uso.
I'm Kaido Kikiolu.
I'm Ayo Makinde. Have a wonderful day, and please do keep safe.
And I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Don't forget to always take responsibility. See you next time.